Okay, everybody. Good evening, how are you? You're all very welcome to this latest talk tonight in McMordie Hall here in the School of Music at Queen's. Delighted to have such a good crowd out on a very cold evening. My name is James Dillon. I'm the Assistant Director of Engagement and Head of Government Affairs here at Queen's. So I was ready to rescue some with a keen interest in politics, so really keen to get to the main part of tonight's proceedings. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Stephen Flynn MP to Queen's University this evening. As you know, Stephen is the Member of Parliament for Aberdeen South and leader of the Scottish National Party in the House of Commons. Whilst being the MP for Aberdeen South, Stephen's a huge Dundee United fan. And it takes me, I don't know why, because I'm a huge Spurs fan, so I don't know why I was doing this, but I was down a rabbit hole and I read on YouTube and ended up watching Dundee United beating Barcelona 3-1 in the 1987 UEFA Cup quarter final. Anybody who's interested in watching that back, please do. It's a great watch. Yeah. Look, I'm really delighted to you taking the time to come over to Belfast this evening. It's really important for us to be part of the wider political debate on these islands. It's really welcome that leaders such as yourself take the time to see it's important to come over and talk to us on an evening in December. So, we're sure that your insights in particular around your experiences, around the party you represent, around the things you lobby for, or how you work in Westminster, will be of great interest to this audience in this place at this time. So again, thank you. As you all know, the LitTalks launched nearly 5 years ago to give political leaders and civic leaders the opportunity to engage with students and graduates here at Queen's. They become a really key part of the canon of this university. They become a really key part of what we see ourselves as, which is an outward-looking, civically engaged institution, which provides the opportunity for honest, robust debate and discussion. So things like this, society such as this, are proof of a thriving university. They're proof of the need to ensure that the space is given to have these kind of talks and debates. So I want to give my congratulations to the Lunar Society, to the organisers, to the team that keeps this all going. I know much hard work went into it. Queen's as an institution is incredibly keen to continue to support you in your endeavours. But it would be remiss me not to mention the horrific marks its 175th anniversary in February. That coincides with the 180th anniversary of this university. This is the 9th oldest university in the UK, and we have one of the oldest debating societies within that. So it's really important, and again, testament to the work over generations that you're now keeping alive. I'm just going to very quickly signpost the agenda for the evening. I'm going to invite Stephen in a minute to give his opening remarks, and then Claire is going to conduct a question and answer session after a short interview. So I'm going to exit stage left now. I really hope you enjoy your evening. Once again, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Queen's this evening. I'm going to hand over for your remarks now, Steve. Thank you very much.
I'm going to test the cameraman here because I'm not going to stand behind the lectern if that's alright. Apologies if I walk in front of you at any point. Primarily because I don't know if you've noticed, but in the House of Commons we don't have anything in front of us, so I'm very used to not speaking with anything directly in front of me. Thank you for raising Dundee United. I didn't expect to be able to talk about that tonight, so you're away to get half an hour on the pros and cons of the best football team in the world. Importantly, they didn't just beat Barcelona once, they beat them 4 times. The only team in football history in Europe to beat Barcelona home and away on more than one occasion, Morocco being a lucky. Anyway, you didn't come to hear about that. But what I'm actually going to do is talk a little bit about the Constitution, if that's all right. And I'm happy to address any questions, notwithstanding that, any easy questions, notwithstanding that topic that come to pass. And what I want to do actually is do something which is probably a little bit unique for a Scottish nationalist in many respects, and that's to think about an important British moment in history, and to think when, for many people, the British state was at its strongest. Now, there'll be many of the political persuasions across these isles who would think that might be the Brexit vote. There'll be some who think that's during the period of Thatcherism and deregulation. For most people on the centre left, what they would probably look at in recent times is the period between 1945 and 1950, the great reformist government of Clement Attlee, where we've seen the beverage reforms put in place, much of which still impacts our lives today in relation to insurance, in relation to dentistry, in relation to our National Health Service. Now you might be wondering why I'm talking about that, because at that profound British moment in history, something was also happening in Scotland. There was a guy called John McCormick, and what John McCormick managed to achieve is quite remarkable. He got almost, and there's probably some forgeries in there, but around 2 million Scots to sign the Scottish Covenant. And what the Scottish Covenant did was it sought to ensure that there was a return of Scotland's Parliament, of course, which had been adjourned many, many years before. And that's incredibly important, because at a time of profound British political strength, at a time of massive social and political change on these isles, much of which would have probably been welcomed by people in Scotland, nearly 2 million were asking for Scotland's Parliament to return. Now, Westminster, as always does, in many respects, ignored those pleas. But the reason why I'm highlighting that is because after the general election this year, many people thought that the nationalist movement was on its heels in Scotland, that it was done, it was vanquished. Many of our political opponents said this is the SNP back in their box and the independence movement with it. Many political commentators said the exact same thing. And the reason why they are incorrect is not just because they misjudge the tide of history, the slow tide of history, which is moving in favour of Scottish independence. They also misjudge the nature of the independence movement itself. In that period between 1945 and the early 1950s, evidences quite clearly that even at its most strong period, there was still that desire in Scotland for home rule. Now, if we look at that in the modern time, so 6 months ago, my party suffered an incredibly difficult general election. Many of my colleagues lost their seats. Yet here, just a matter of a few months later, the independence polling numbers in Scotland have 54% in favour of independence. That was in a Times poll just at the weekend. The Scottish National Party is now polling 15 to 16% above the Labour Party. If there was to be a general election now in Scotland, the difference would be dramatically different, and we're only a few months later. But the most important thing in that, from my perspective, is those independence numbers. Because despite the argument that a Labour government would impact upon that, we've actually seen it grow. Now, what that means for many of us in the independence movement is that our gut is right, that we are moving in a direction where Scotland will become an independent nation. But what we don't yet have the answer to is the process by which that happens. Now, much of the political dialogue in Scotland has been incredibly focused on that process. My party has been incredibly focused on how do we get to a position where you have a second independence referendum, because we know from the UK Supreme Court case that Scotland's Parliament does not have the constitutional powers to have a referendum. And that's where I find the example in Northern Ireland particularly interesting, particularly with the Good Friday Agreement, because what we of course have there is the constructive ambiguity of a principle that where the people want to determine their future, they should be able to do so. But what we don't have is concrete certainty as to how that would happen, both in Northern Ireland, but also in Scotland. Now, there are very many political differences between our two parts of these islands, but that key principle maintains through both nations, and that is the fact that we lack that certainty that political parties themselves cannot provide without the Westminster Parliament, the UK government, being willing to engage in the conversation. Now, at a base level, this is where the Scottish Parliament election in 2026 is going to be incredibly important, because if the SNP can once again highlight the fact that we can win, and we can win well, and we can obtain a pro-independence majority within Scotland's Parliament, again, how does a Labour Party respond in that context some 12 years after the last independence referendum? I think it leaves them with no choice but to come to the table and to provide that constitutional concrete certainty that we all want to see and that the people of Scotland quite clearly deserve. So it's with that in mind that I'm quite happy to answer any and all questions that you have tonight. The constitutional debate in Scotland is something which has not gone away, will not go away until we know where, when and how the people of Scotland will be able to determine their future, whether people agree with my cause or whether they don't. Yeah.
Whatever suits you best, really. So, just wanted to start this evening by saying thank you very much to Mr. Stephen Flynn for being here and for just putting himself out there and willing to be scrutinised by an audience of students. We really have a lot of respect for that and we're very thankful. Just want to thank the Literific also for having me back, even though I'm not a student anymore. And I'm just glad to be here, yes, and clinging on to these opportunities. So thank you very much for that also. I just wanted to start, I guess, by getting a sense of your early life and influences before you would have gone into politics. So you grew up moving around a lot between a smaller place called Brecon and Dundee. Did growing up, I guess, in like a smaller town and the city, did that give you a kind of wider perspective into different outlooks in Scotland and kind of the maybe the urban and the more rural?
You would think so, and there's probably a very deep answer in there, but I'll be honest with you, I probably wasn't paying that much attention when I was a young kid. My family did indeed move quite a lot between Dundee and Brecon. I lived in quite a few different homes and went to quite a few different schools. But the thing that probably mattered to me most in that context was less my wider surroundings and more my family environment. A very working class, normal, aspirational household where my mum had multiple different jobs. I mind her working in a bakery, I mind us going to pick her up from work very, very late at night from a place called Blockbuster, which was a video store. I don't know if anyone knows what a video is. I know some guys in the room who know what a video is. Me and my sister would go with my dad to pick her up from work very late at night. She worked in a care home. She actually became a nurse, and she had many different jobs at many different times, sometimes more than one. And my dad was an engineer for a Japanese company, and he travelled around Scotland a lot and often abroad as well. And the thing that was always kind of distilled into us was the freedom to think how you wanted him to act with impulse sometimes. Sometimes that caused a little bit of consternation and a few problems, to say the least, particularly for myself. But we always felt very supported and following through, my sister and I, in the ideals and aspirations that we had, and that's why my younger brother came along as well and was shaped in the same way. The big thing that probably shaped my life more than that though was I was disabled for 18 years. So when I was 13, 14, I was running through school to deliver the register, jumped down the flight of stairs and didn't get back up. And more than a good few months later, I was diagnosed with a condition called vascular necrosis, which means blood doesn't flow to your hip bone. So the reason I'd collapsed is because my bone had effectively given way and broken. So I was on crutches for the best part of 18 years. When I was first sworn into the House of Commons, I went in there with a crutch. And that allowed me to develop a thick skin, which is essential in the House of Commons, but it also gave me a pretty unique, in many respects, understanding of what's important in life, and the social justice which runs through me is in part driven by my own experiences and my family upbringing. But a combination probably of the two, and I'm very fortunate, although it was difficult at the time, I'm very fortunate to have had both of those things in my life.
Yeah, so I suppose just starting off then in politics, you studied politics at university, you became an SNP researcher and then an MP. What convinces you, and how do you kind of say to people that you have the lived experience outside of politics to represent the kind of ordinary, perhaps even apolitical person in Scotland?
Yeah, I guess the easy and flippant answer to that is that folk have voted for me on numerous occasions, so I can't be that bad at both the local government elections, but also 2 consecutive general elections, when the tide was very much going against my party as well. My majority only fell by a very, very small fraction, notwithstanding percentage terms, but in actual full number terms. So I guess there's a very, very clear example of the fact that the public were okay with my engagement with them and my representation of their views and values. But it's something which I get challenged on a fair bit. Now, from my perspective, you can't buy your background, and you can't place it, and the values which were instilled in me are obviously something which I hold dear. My own personal experience, as I say, of living as a disabled individual for 18 years is something that not many people do. But I think what we do in politics far too often is to rush to try and get the perfect set of circumstances. This person is the perfect politician because they've experienced X, Y, and Z. When in actual fact, we all experience different things at different points in our lives. Some of us will get married, some of us won't, some of us will have kids, some of us won't, some of us will have family situations which are challenging. Many of us won't. It's about you as a person and what you stand for, what you believe in, and what your values are, which matter most in my experience to the public. And you, as an individual, can have values which resonate with the people that you want to represent, and you can represent those values well in the job that you do. That goes much further than any backgrounds that you could or could possibly not have had. Some of the best folk I've met in politics are people from backgrounds that are vastly different from many people who've had privilege which I could barely imagine. But what drives them is their values, and they vote accordingly, they represent their constituents accordingly. It's the people who represent themselves and who vote based upon their own interests are the ones that you've got to be worried about, and more often than not the public's got a sharp eye when it comes to those folk.
Can you see though how spending kind of more time outside of politics throughout your career might allow you to relate to constituents better, perhaps?
Maybe. It's maybe a fair assessment. I mean, I don't think many folk worked for 4 years on the graveyard shift in Tesco during Christmas time on a checkout, which is pretty fraught with excitement from customers. And there's many people who won't have experienced the things that I've experienced, but I've never seen it as a barrier, and certainly nobody who I've spoken to at length in relation to it has seen it as a problem. Otherwise, the public ultimately would have had their final say in an election to my detriment, and that's not yet been the case. I do think, and I think it's an important point, so I'll reiterate, I think in politics what matters most is your values, your policies and your principles, and how you represent them, and how you put those across in a way which represents others. And that's always been one of it's probably always been the key driver in everything that I've done, and I like to think that folk have responded well to that.
Okay, so just to start then talking about your political career, I kind of want to talk about the parallels between Scotland and Northern Ireland, considering obviously our location tonight and what you referenced at the start as well. So Sinn Féin are obviously the main nationalist party here. They don't take their seats in the Westminster Parliament. They say British institutions should play no part in governing Ireland, and they as MPs shouldn't make decisions on behalf of the British people. In light of that, is your party recognising the sovereignty of the British Parliament over the people of Scotland in taking your seats within that Parliament?
So I was warned that the questions tonight will probably be harder than the questions I get on the telly, and that's certainly keeping with that. Although it's not the first time I've heard it. So I had, when I first became the SNP leader in Westminster, I had a job of work to do to engage with the SNP membership. So I did a lot of travelling across Scotland, and very similar questions were put to me with regards to why do we go there, why do we legitimise Westminster when they ignore our democratic will, because there's obviously a majority in Scotland's Parliament in favour of an independence referendum, and has been for numerous years now, and it's just ignored. Why do you engage when they ignore us? My answer to that's always very, very simple. I won't leave my constituents without a voice in the Westminster Parliament, whilst the Westminster Parliament has a profound impact upon their lives. And the current UK budget is probably a pretty clear example of that, because what we have is reserved policy measures in relation to like national insurance, in relation to inheritance tax, in relation to the winter fuel allowance, and if we go further to like the two-child benefit cap, where the impact of decision taken in Westminster is damaging to the people I represent, and I believe it's my view to go to Westminster and make sure that their voices are heard and to vote accordingly. I understand and respect the fact that not everyone shares that view and that they want to disengage. That's perfectly legitimate. It's not been a barrier to the electoral success of the individuals that you're referring to, but from my personal view, and it's a strongly held view, if you are elected to represent people, then you should be willing to go and represent them within the House of Commons. Of course, one of the big barriers that many people face, and I think it's a discussion which is well worth having, is the oath of allegiance, which is required in order to sit in the House of Commons. You don't get paid as an MP until you go into the chamber and provide the oath of allegiance. Now, I'm a Republican. I don't believe that there should be a monarchy. Do I believe that people should be taking the oath of allegiance? Probably not in that context. However, I'm very respectful of the fact that we do have a monarchy, and whilst the monarchy is our head of state, I will provide them the respect that's required, which is why I was willing to give the oath, something which I've obviously done on a number of occasions since as well.
Okay, so obviously your play there is that you're representing your constituents. I just want to draw your attention to comments that Wes Streeting made to the Herald this year. He said that if he was a Scot, he'd want to be an MSP rather than an MP. He said the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament have so much freedom to do their own thing. So why don't you concentrate your efforts there on things like equality, social issues, and what makes your view differ from that?
Well, I'd quite like to be in Scotland's Parliament and cause a little bit of a species just a matter of weeks ago from my desire to do so. But I think what Wes completely misunderstands there, and this is something which happens in Westminster very often, is the direct correlation between decisions that are taken in Westminster and the consequence upon people in Scotland, whether that's in relation to many of the policy issues which I've referred to with regards to the UK budget, whether that's in relation to defence, whether that's in relation to foreign affairs. The notion that we can pretend that these things aren't happening and should detach ourselves is frankly absurd. Whilst the Scottish Parliament has legislative responsibility for matters in relation to the devolved settlement, it's obviously got to act to try and make the best of the situation that it faces. And I'm pretty relaxed and confident about the ability of my colleagues in Holyrood to do that. And it's not often that a government's in power for 17 years, and based upon the opinion polls most recently, the Scottish National Party will be in power in Holyrood for a fair bit longer too.
If independence, though, is your aim, you've said yourself that Holyrood is the platform that will drive the route to an independent Scotland. So if your focus is that independence, you've admitted really that Westminster isn't the most effective way to achieve that, surely, in saying that?
Well, I think all you've got to do in that context is look at history. When Scotland had most recent history, when Scotland had its independence referendum, it came as a result not of massively winning the election in 2015 in terms of the general election and delivering a record 56 MPs to Westminster. It came prior to that in 2011 by winning a majority in Holyrood, by breaking the electoral system in Holyrood, which is designed to prevent a majority. So if you want to be able to properly express the views of the people of Scotland in favour of an independence referendum, in favour of that look forward, then being successful in the Holyrood election is absolutely key to that. And that's why myself and many others have made that reference, because it's based upon the most practical example we have. But there's a very big difference between that and disengaging from Westminster. And I don't think it's right that you should seek to do one and not the other. I think you can and you should do both. And look, I'm not going to blow my own trumpet here, but over the course of the the last, year and a bit in Westminster. If it hadn't been for the Scottish National Party, there would have been no votes in Westminster in relation to one of the most pressing foreign policy issues to impact Westminster in a long time with regards to the situation in Gaza. And I regret to say that there hasn't been one, again, since the general election, unless I'm badly mistaken, which I may well be, rack my brains here, there hasn't been one since the general election because the Scottish National Party are not in a position to exercise a vote in the House of Commons as a result of the general election as it stood. But that's not just a reflection on our result in the general election. We could have won every single seat in Scotland in the general election. We still wouldn't have been able to force a vote in the House of Commons because we wouldn't have been the third party because the Lib Dems won so many seats. So there is a value to us being there. And not just in relation to Gaza, which is something which of course has gained significant attention, but there was a situation just shortly after the election in relation to the 2-child benefit cap as well, which was a debate and a vote, King's Speech, if I recall correctly, which was forced by the SNP working in partnership with other parties and ultimately led to many members of the now Labour government losing the Labour whip. If that's not an effective use of parliamentary time, if that's not an effective use of SNP politicians' time in Westminster, then I'm not sure what either of those things are.
Okay, so sticking then to that topic of your party's desire for independence, in an article for the Times, former Deputy Leader Sillars said he doesn't know what you stand for politically besides Scottish independence. Is having that kind of sense of identity and having more of a wider sense of identity, is that part of a problem for your party and why Scottish Labour did so well after that election, having that sense of identity?
I think Jim might have just been referring to me as opposed to the party.
Is it a wider
in fairness, he should have just picked up the phone and asked. I'm disappointed that he didn't. We probably would have had a lot in common. I would imagine, or maybe get a cup of coffee at some point in the future. But no, I don't. I think that the clear left of centre social democratic values of the SNP are something which has been at the heart of our success. Look at many of our policy successes in Scotland, which are one contrary to what happens elsewhere within the United Kingdom, whether that's free university tuition, whether that's free personal care, whether that's making sure that we have 1,140 hours of free childcare. We've used the levers of devolution to exercise our values to the benefit of the Scottish people, and that's been rewarded with multiple election successes. It would be very easy for us to say, well, Westminster's doing this, decisions in England are happening in this way or are happening in Wales in that way, let's just follow suit. We've chosen not to do that. We've chosen to use the powers at our disposal to try and change the lives of the people of Scotland. And as someone who benefited from free university tuition, who would never have been able to go to university notwithstanding, and my dad wasn't able to go to university because his family would never have been able to afford it, there's a real practical example of the SNP's values benefiting the people of Scotland, and standing right here.
Okay, so if there isn't much of a vision outside of kind of independence, and if that's what your party's promoting on the national stage, and that's how people are maybe seeing your party as being kind of a one-issue party almost, how do you plan to have electoral success when support for independence does fluctuate? I mean, I know you referenced that Times survey, but a statistical this year showed, in 2020, the people who would support independence was sitting at 53%, while in 2024 that had actually gone down to 44%. So how do you plan to actually appeal to the electorate if that support is kind of unsteady?
I think the obvious and again flippant answer for that is that it was 53% in 2020, it's now 54% in 2024. But I actually think that the premise of your question is based upon a mindset which is quite clear in London, and certainly clear to me from having been in London for many years, that the SNP is an independent party, nothing more and nothing less. But when we drill down into the policy successes of the party and why Alex Salmond was so successful, why Nicola Sturgeon was so successful, why John Swinney is now going to be so successful, it's based upon the policy decisions that are taken in Holyrood, which are different to those being taken in Westminster. And the Scottish public are very in tune with that, and they respond to that accordingly. And I think it's a criticism which doesn't take into account the savvy nature of the people of Scotland with regards to who they vote for and why they vote for them as well.
So why weren't they so disillusioned with your party at the last election then? If there was that real thirst for independence, why did your success dip?
Do I turn the camera off? Look, this is there's a myriad of factors for that. I think, and I'll be pretty candid with you all here, we had a couple of changes in leadership, which never goes down well with the public. There was some policy decisions which I don't think resonated with the public in the way that we perhaps thought they would. There's been some big things happen to the SNP, which of course I can't get into much detail about, but they are well versed and well rehearsed in the public domain, and a combination of all those things, plus the real and present desire which was there, and understandably there, by the way, from the public to get rid of the Tories, because the Scottish populace aren't very sympathetic to them at the best of times, but even less so this year. When you put all of those things together, the SNP lose seats at the general election. We polled just above 30%, Labour got about 36%. As a result, under first past the post, we got 9 seats and they get 37, I think it is. And that's the nature of the system as it stands. The Holyrood system's very different in terms of its proportional representation on top of the first past the post, of course. And the big thing that's changed is the sense of purpose which is back there within the SNP, which John Swinney has galvanised the party. The budget, the response to the budget has been overwhelmingly positive, primarily based upon the policy divergence which exists between Holyrood and Westminster on so many key issues. And married with that resurgence and that certainty, stability and safety of John and Kate's leadership in Holyrood, when you marry that with the mess of the Labour Party so far in London, it leads to an electoral turnaround which has the SNP back 15-16 points ahead in the polls.
So you're more confident for next time, obviously. I'm just going to take you back to your decision in announcing your intention to become an SNP in 2026 without quitting your Commons seat. Obviously you've gone back in that since, but kind of talk me through your thinking at the time and your thought process as to how you were going to do both those things.
So I've always been pretty clear on this. I think for most SNP MPs, they see their future and their role in Holyrood because of the consequence, the real direct consequence it can have upon our nation's future. And I like to think I could play a wee positive part in that for a number of reasons. Certainly when it comes to some of the biggest issues of the day, whether it's cost of living, whether it's the energy transition, which is incredibly important in my part of the northeast of Scotland, whether it's in relation to education or transport or all of the bald areas, I believe I can contribute. And I was simply hoping, and may well come to the conclusion I do still seek to put myself forward. I've not decided quite yet, that members in my local area, who obviously determine who their candidate would be, would like to put their faith in myself. I didn't believe it would be beyond the realms of possibility to hold the two roles, because there's there's a very significant overlap between my Westminster seat and the Holyrood seat. I didn't think it would be, we thought, beyond the realms of possibility to be able to represent folk adequately in both parliaments for the best part of 18 months to 2 years is obviously a significant cost to the public purse. Were I to become an SNP candidate for Holyrood, were I to be successfully elected, £200,000 potentially for the local authority to pick up the tab, which I don't think I'd be forgiven from my colleagues who run the council, if I'm honest. So when I put all those things together, I thought this is possible, this is doable. It's quite clear that I misjudged the moods in that regard, and there's not the appetite for there to be MPs and MSPs. And I did who hold dual mandates, and I did something which is probably quite difficult for a lot of politicians to do, which is hold my hands up and say I got that bit wrong. So I probably stepped out of my own comfort zone in that context, but I did so for the right reasons, just as I'd put my my hat in the ring for the right reasons. Now my party will determine who can stand. There'll be selection rules that are put in place, and I'll base my decision on the outcome of their decision.
Okay, and at the time when you announced that, you referenced a second ago that kind of strong party you want going forward with John and Kate at the helm of it, but your decision to announce that did cause internal dispute within the ranks. You did face a backlash from MSP and Roddick, for example. Is that really kind of the strong, cohesive voice for independence you're looking for? And is the party kind of quite as cohesive as you thought?
Look, I can't answer for the views and the words and the responses of others. All I can control is my own my own words, and I'll use them carefully in this context, because I think it is important to recognise that John has got the party back together and that we're all pointing in the same direction in relation to the Holyrood elections. We have had a disagreement with regards to the selection criteria, and I think that's something which is fine for folk to have different opinions. How you exercise your opinion in the political sphere is incredibly important, and I think that's something which a lot of folk are probably reflecting upon right now. But what's more important is that we don't end up in a situation where we're talking about amongst ourselves, because there's nothing worse if you're a member of the public than sitting watching politicians argue amongst themselves internally about things and selection rules, which primarily most of them have got very little interest in. And you know, that's one of the factors behind my decision to say I got this bit wrong, and why I'll take my time to decide what I do next.
Do you regret the fact that your party was quite vocal in criticising the Scottish Tories for doing roughly the same thing?
I'm not going easy on us here. I think that there's always a place and time in politics where views are strongly held and exercised with a degree of firmness, which is befitting the person and the occasion. There is a slight difference between the example that you've referenced there, which is to do with Douglas Ross. Being within both parliaments, and myself, the difference being that Douglas Ross wanted to go from Edinburgh to London, which is the age-old route for unionist politicians to go on, and I wanted to go from Westminster to Holyrood. It wouldn't have been unique. It's something which a lot of the members of the Scottish Parliament did when the Parliament was formed. And of course what the former First Minister for Scotland, Alex Salmond, between 2007 and 2010, when he was First Minister. So it was possible, and it was doable, and I did consider all these things, but ultimately it wasn't the right decision that I made. And I would much prefer my party were talking about politics and policy, and the Scottish budget is a key example of why that is more important, because that resonates with the public in a much more important way.
Okay, promise this is my last question about double jobbing, but Professor John Curtis commented that your intentions may have been to establish yourself as a successor to John Swinney as party leader. Have you ambition, I guess, to rise to the top of the SNP? If you were there, would you change anything?
So I don't think there'll be a leadership contest in the SNP for a long time. John is still a young man, younger than Keir Starmer, if I remember correctly, and I think we're going to be very successful in the Scottish elections. And I think that John, as a result, will be the leader of the SNP for a good period to come yet. And you know, the thing that my name's often thrown about in the discussion about what happens next, what matters to me and what matters to the public is what happens now, and how we make sure that we're meeting their priorities going forward and delivering upon them in Holyrood. And I just want to be part of the team. I just want to contribute to that. I believe I can contribute well, and if I do decide to go down that route, and I'm fortunate enough to receive the support of my party membership locally, then I'll try to do that to the best of my abilities, but there's still some decisions to be made there, but it also underestimates the talent that sits within the Holyrood group itself. there's maybe some names that not everyone's familiar with unless you pay a lot of attention to Scottish politics. But within the SNP group in Holyrood, whether that's Mary McCallan, whether that's Neil Gray, whether that's Jenny Ruth, and indeed a good few others, there's a lot of folk who are championing at the bit to make sure the SNP deliver, not just for the people of Scotland, but for our independent future as well. And they all have a huge role to play, as I hope I do, in shaping the SNP going forward.
What would you do if you were leader for a day? What's one thing you would do as leader of the SNP?
I remember someone answering this question horrifically. It's the Tory individual who we were referring to there, and you should watch it if you've not seen it. Some of the daftest answers I've ever heard a politician give, and said a lot about his values, and I would say that to his face as well. I think I probably have done in the past. If I could do something for a day, I would probably seek to try and get as many people, and this is not to say that we don't have policies in place to do this, because we do have the Housing First model brought in from Finland to achieve this. To try and achieve this, I would try and make sure that everyone was off the streets, because I think that's the right thing to do. I've engaged with so many people over the years in that respect, so many homeless charities in Aberdeen and elsewhere, and sometimes that's difficult. Sometimes people don't want the structure that can be provided by moving into a home. We've seen the success of models elsewhere, but I would like to think that would be the thing that would motivate me the most, to make sure everyone had a warm bed and a warm feed, particularly young folk.
There are apparent problems though that you could fix within the SNP. There have been allegations of misogyny, and in July, former SNP MP Joanna Cherry and ex-Drug Minister Elena Whitman highlighted abuse they faced within the party. In response to that, Kate Forbes said failure to tackle such abuse would lead to women avoiding future political roles. And what's kind of the remedy for that? What steps is the party taking to address those internal issues?
Look, Kate's right. Of course she is. And you know, if there's ever any examples of that, I would like to think that they're brought to the attention of the party, and the party responds accordingly. We're in a very fortunate position where the majority of our members of the Scottish Parliament are female, and I think that's a strong record for any political party to have, and is somewhat different to what we see over many generations elsewhere. But I also think it's incumbent upon all of us in elected office to try and make sure that we are encouraging as many people as possible to stand for election who are female, and to give them the support that they require, because they get a hell of a lot of grim abuse. My former colleague Mary Black probably being the most pertinent example. I can think of. Mary's a good friend of mine, and some of the abuse that Mary suffered relentlessly for her entire time in elected office was just completely unfair, and was in no way a reflection of what she's like as an individual, because she's absolutely brilliant. So we've all got a responsibility within politics to support people to get elected, and once they're elected to provide them with that support as well. And I think I've got a role to play in that context, like everyone else. And there's an abundance of women who are involved in politics locally in Aberdeen, particularly in the local authority in Aberdeen. One in particular, Miranda Radley, who won the SNP's Councillor of the Year at our annual awards just the other week, who's an incredibly talented individual and in politics for the right reasons. And it's incumbent upon me and everyone else to help these folk throughout their time in elected office, if we can.
Can you cite any practical, concrete steps that the party has taken to make sure the situation changes with regards to misogyny?
Look, I think there's probably, in terms of my responsibilities within the party, it's probably important for me to say that I'm the SNP Westminster leader. I don't sit on the party's National Executive Committee, and I've never had any role within the party's process as an entity within Edinburgh itself. But what I do know is that we have clear structures in place with regards to disciplinary processes against members should they be found to have breached or been suggested to have breached party rules. And I would like to think that those structures as they are robust. And if they aren't robust, then I'm sure that many people within the party would be willing to revisit them, myself included.
So obviously you're Westminster leader, you referenced there that that's sorted out in a different kind of part of the SNP, but surely it feeds into each different section, and things like training you would be aware of if the party had done things to change.
Yeah, well, I think we need to. I think in that context, it's difficult for me to comment on individual cases that have happened, because it's very unlikely I would have direct knowledge of them. I know what happens with people who I represent as the SNP Westminster leader, and I've cited the example of Mary and the abuse that she received externally. I obviously don't sit on the party's disciplinary processes, so I don't know if there's been individuals who've been brought in, but what I do have is confidence in the likes of our party's business convener, Angela Constance, and others within the party's wider NEC to respond appropriately and robustly where it's required, because we need to make sure that politics, not just for ourselves but for everyone, is as welcoming as it possibly can be.
Okay, just going to bring you on then to finally really the SNP's record in governing Scotland, and kind of to what standard that's been done. So statistics from this year show there are around 28,000 homes empty, while homelessness has reached record levels. People are now waiting on average double as long as they were in 2019 to be seen by a doctor when they present to A&E. Can that be seen as your party kind of having been given responsibility and not fulfilling that properly?
There is more homes being built in Scotland per head of population than in England and in Wales, and when it comes to our A&E waiting times, they're the best in the entire UK. So what I think it goes to show is the fact that there's a lot of work still to be done, but where we have control of the levers of power, we've been able to exercise our responsibilities in a way which is better than elsewhere. Now, if you're a person waiting in A&E, or you're a person who's on a housing list, that's going to be of little comfort, which is why, as a government, a record amount of money has been put into the NHS, and why a significant amount of money has been put into new affordable homes programmes right across Scotland, because we do continue to need to have to do more, but we can't escape from the pressures that there's been, pressures which of course haven't essentially or only been a responsibility of things that we have or haven't done, notwithstanding the COVID pandemic, notwithstanding inflation, which of course was driven in a large part by decisions taken elsewhere, notwithstanding the pressures on interest rates, which were primarily driven by Liz Truss and other geopolitical factors. So there's many things which are built up to impact upon our ability to deliver in the way that perhaps we want to, but our record certainly stands up to scrutiny, and certainly better than the record elsewhere on these isles in both those topics. Okay,
so you cited a fair bit of blame there on the British government, for example, Liz Truss and inflation. What would you do in an independent Scotland when there would be no kind of external force to blame in that sense?
We would take responsibility for our decisions as every other independent nation does, and respond accordingly. But as it happens, many of the things that I've cited there, and many of the pressures that we face are a decision of a government that is not in Scotland seeking to meet Scotland's needs. That's true in relation to some of those matters, and it's true today in relation to some of the big policy areas and challenges that we face. But I think in fairness, what I also did was highlight the successes of Scotland's government and the Scottish Parliament in dealing with some of the big challenging issues of the day in a way which I think other parts of the UK should seek to replicate.
Does it actually, in a sense, though, suit your party that those statistics aren't perfect, as your party obviously remains a part of the UK? Does it suit it, your argument, to be slightly dysfunctional as part of the UK, so you can then cite the case for independence?
No, I don't think there's a link between those two things, because I think what we want to do is to deliver in the best possible way that we can to generate investment in Scotland. We've got the highest level of inward investment anywhere in the UK, out with the City of London, to generate economic growth so that we can fund our public services. We've got a higher level of economic growth in Scotland than elsewhere on these aisles, to make sure that people can be seen in A&E quicker. We've got a better record in that context to make sure that we build more homes. We've got a better record in that context to make sure that more people are being educated in Scotland to a high standard. 95% of Scotland's young people go on to positive destinations, which of course is schools, university, workplace or college, or the fact that they get free tuition to make sure that we protect our elderly, which we do through personal care, and of course we're going to do through the reintroduction of the winter fuel allowance. So our job is to govern and govern well on a platform which represents our values, and I think we've done that successfully. And look, if we hadn't done it successfully, then we wouldn't be in power for 17 years, and looking like hopefully we'll be able to continue in government after the next Scottish Parliament election.
But arguably at the last election it wasn't a ringing endorsement of your record in Scotland.
And I think in relation to the last election, I've probably addressed some of the issues which were prevalent, many of which I see up close, which impacted upon the result as well. But what I probably didn't reflect upon enough was that change ethos which existed within the UK, because I had a front row seat in the House of Commons to some of the chaos that we've seen with Liz and with the return of Rishi, and of course prior to that with Boris and his Lions Parliament and all the rest of it. And who wouldn't want change? I haven't seen that, and why wouldn't you want to hope that things can get better? Things haven't got better, and of course that's reflected in the fact that a government can spend £70 billion at its first budget and find itself more unpopular than Nigel Farage.
How would you plan for your reference Nigel Farage there, an independence referendum to not be divisive, as we saw with the Brexit referendum? How would you kind of persuade the British government to pull that lever when it could actually create such a divide within Scotland?
Pardon my language here, actually, I'll say it hello. I don't think anyone in Scottish political life who's a serious individual would stand in front of posters with people fleeing conflict and essentially try and shape people's views on lies. I don't think that anyone in Scotland's serious political discourse would want to go down the route which dominated the Brexit referendum. In fact, what I think people would want to do is try and replicate much of the success of the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, which I believe was very inclusive and very positive. Now, for some people that wasn't the case. They found it deeply challenging because of the strongly held views that they had regarding the constitutional settlement in Scotland. But the only people that can ultimately be responsible for that are the politicians and the key actors which take place that are at the forefront of any campaign. And I know from being well versed in both the proponents of independence but also the proponents of the Union, that the vast overwhelming majority of us would seek to have a debate over Scotland's future which was good-natured, positive and focused on people and their future rather than scaremongering as the far right have done in other examples.
Why would you expect the result to be different now to it was at that last referendum?
I think there's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, people in Scotland, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here because I'm sure you've got the stat written down there, I think about 70% of folk in Scotland want to be back in the European Union. We were told that the only way to remain in the European Union was to vote to stay in the Union of the UK, and of course that didn't turn out to be the case. I think something which will surprise a lot of people in the wider debate is there's always been this assumption, this lazy assumption I think it's been, that one of the driving factors behind Scottish independence is having a Conservative government, and a Labour government can try to mitigate against that and protect against it. I think I highlighted in my opening remarks that's not necessarily something which ties in with history, but I don't think it ties in with the practice of the latest iteration of the Labour government that we have. But beyond that, I think that we're in a place where we need to be not just worried about, not focused upon others, but focused on ourselves and the arguments that we can put forward to convince people, a small number of people, to change their views and to be optimistic about what an independent Scotland can achieve, not just as a small prosperous nation, but a small prosperous European nation. We have an abundance of natural resource, and I'm not talking about our oil and gas sector, which of course is a declining asset, notwithstanding its intrinsic value to Scotland's economy. I'm talking about Scotland's green renewable potential. We have within 100 nautical miles of Aberdeen is 70% of Scotland, which is 28 gigawatts of offshore wind potential. We have an opportunity to create a hydrogen pipeline into the biggest economy in Central Europe and Germany, who are crying out for an alternative to gas. We've got world-leading technology in floating turbines in relation to tidal energy, in relation to wave energy. I've met many of the people behind these projects, and a lot of them have honed their skills in the offshore oil and gas sector and then want to drive economic growth for Scotland in the green renewables sector. And I think that affords us a compelling vision of what Scotland can look like in a way which is just, sustainable and equitable for the people who live in Scotland. And what's not more exciting than that?
Okay, I think that's enough questions from me.
Are you sure?
So we're just going to go to the floor now. If anybody has anything, go to Dermot first.
Firstly, a quick football question. As a Celtic fan, this is an important one for me. Do you think Rangers are going to get second? And on an actual policy question, Scotland has minimum unit pricing on alcohol. Since that policy was brought in, overdose deaths in relation to drugs have massively went up. As a policy, it largely has failed in terms of healthcare outcomes. Do you stand over it? Do you think it's something that should be continued in Scotland?
So, in relation to your first question, to give myself time to think, the second one, that's what politicians do. I made a promise to myself when I was elected never to talk about my views in relation to the Glasgow Rangers, and I'm going to stick with that tonight because I'll get myself in a wee bit of bother. Secondly, in relation to minimum unit pricing, there's variations, there are different reports that say different things. Do I think it's important that the government took action to try and deal with the intrinsic problem that we have with regards to people's alcohol consumption? Absolutely. And I would be confident in referring to the research which says that it has made a difference. And ultimately, if you can get to a situation where it's even one person whose life you are changing or saving as a result of a policy initiative, I think that's a good thing. And I think the argument to the alternative is to say that you should still have extra cheap booze on the shelves in Scotland, that you should be able to go and get multi-packs and deals on bevy, which I'm not sure if that's the case in Northern Ireland or not. It's been a long while since you've been able to get multi-buy deals on the bevy in Scotland, on the alcohol, in Scotland. And if the argument that folk are positing, which I think some of them are in Scotland, is that that's what you should revert to, I'm not entirely sure how that contributes to reducing folks' alcohol intake. But I think the important thread that runs through all of that, and I think this is what the Scottish Government's tried to promote, is to see such issues as a health-related matter. And that's a step change in mindset. It goes back to the earlier discussion with regards to the policies and the principles of our party being much greater than simply just independence, but that social justice for everyone, and health inequality is a key aspect of that.
Hi, I don't know if someone has going to shoot.
Is that a football question as well?
But this is just going for the back of Dermot's one. More to do with the statistics that have come out of Scotland in relation to drug deaths. What, if any, role do you think decriminalisation could play in Scotland when it comes to mitigating the harmful effect of drug use?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. Look, I like a lot of folk in Scotland, I'm aware of people, very close friends of mine who've lost loved ones as a result of the appalling situation we have with regards to drug use and drugs deaths. There's obviously been a drive within Scotland to put a lot of effort into overcoming that. It's not going to be easy. I'm heartened by the fact that we're going to have safe consumption rooms. I think the first one is going to be up and running in Glasgow very, very shortly. If it's not already the case, I don't think it's quite open yet. But in relation to decriminalisation, if I recall correctly, and you're testing me here, there was moves afoot to change aspects of that in relation to certain substances within Scotland itself. I think that what that reflects is a wider understanding of what I was probably referring to earlier, that it can't be seen as a justice question because we've been down that route. And if you keep doing the same thing and there's not got a different outcome, then you need to look at doing things differently. And the acceptance of that, I think, amongst my colleagues is real cross-party in Holyrood, and hopefully some of the initiatives that are coming on stream can help us to do even better.
Go for it,
Firstly, very brave in front of an audience of students to defend higher alcohol prices. The second thing is, back in England, my home seat is Lindsay Hoyle's seat, and obviously you referenced before the Gaza vote, which you were not very happy with, so Lindsay Hoyle, and anyway, the question basically is, how is the relationship now? Is it improved since that episode?
I was just wondering where he was. I wasn't sure. I made a point prior to the election, just prior to once the election was called, to have a private chat with Lindsay. I'll obviously not go into the detail of that because that would be unfair. It would be wrong to do that. But I also spoke in the chamber once the Parliament went back, and Lindsay obviously had to be re-elected into his seat, and I think he was the best person in the Parliament to go back into the seat on the basis that, you know, we all do things sometimes for the right reasons but have the wrong reasons. I didn't doubt the sincerity of the decision because I know Lindsay takes the safety of members of Parliament very seriously, and rightly so. And a bit like saying you're wrong sometimes, it's also quite hard in politics to just forgive and forget and move on. But I think that we've both done that. And, we were having a laugh the other day when I managed to get applause from the public gallery in the House of Commons after a PMP, which I've never heard before. One of the members of the public clapping, it was Roger Daltrey from The Who. So we're having a wee laugh about that and how he managed to get a ticket, but I'll just leave it at that.
We'll go to the back corner there.
So my question is kind of more hypothetical. In an independent Scotland, what would the role of Scots Gaelic play if the SNP got that? Would it be an official language, how you promote it, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there's moves afoot in Holyrood to do a lot more to strengthen not just Scots Gaelic, but Scots language as a whole, and many of the other dialects that we of course have as well. Kate Forbes, Deputy First Minister, has obviously got a key role to play within that as a Gaelic speaker herself, and it would certainly be my expectation that we build upon the work that's already been done. I think it's really important culturally for Scotland to not completely shy away from its past and to recognise why Scots Gaelic isn't spoken as freely and as numerously as it had done in the past. We're obviously very committed to that, and I'd like to think that in an independent Scotland others would be as well. There's the usual grumps and bores who say that you shouldn't seek to do these things, but I think that reflects more on them than those who try to promote Scotland's culture.
Go with Tom then.
I kind of want to go back to what you covered earlier about kind of the parallels between Scotland and here. And I suppose the biggest parallel that I can think of, I guess, is like the dynamic between I suppose political nationalism, for a better phrase, which is the one sort of very strong dominant party like yourselves in Sinn Féin, and then a smaller party in Alba and the SDLP. And a lot of people kind of here would talk about, especially even since the election in the South a couple of weeks ago, of kind of hitching the wagon of independence, so to speak, to a single party. In a lot of cases, the detrimental effect that can have. But there are lots of people here who would be favourable, perhaps, to United Ireland, but who wouldn't vote for Sinn Féin. I see the two things in some ways as inseparable. I know all this sort of big young parties, especially compared to the SDLP, but sort of that dynamic, I suppose, is still there. Do you think it's as big an issue in Scotland as sort of being sort of taking that mantle on as the SNP with independence? Do you think it is? Does it work to your detriment nearly as much as maybe your benefit?
That's a really interesting question, actually, and quite important. It's something that we probably reflect upon quite a lot. I think in terms of parliamentary elections and making sure that you have a party which is able to take forward the narrative that independence can be a force for good and something that can be delivered. I think the SNP are the only game in town in Scotland, and certainly the polling for the Alba party would reflect that. I'm not sure that SDLP would be quite as pleased with your comparator example there, but I'm not going any further. But I think the thing that we did really well in the 2014 referendum, and the sort of 18 months, 2 years running up to it, was to recognise that the SNP couldn't be the only force, which is why Yes Scotland was created, and a whole myriad of different organisations came in under that one banner to put forward the positive case for independence. And I would imagine that if we get into such a scenario again, a similar body would be created, because it's the right thing to do. We can't take entire ownership of it, because different people have different views and expectations of what an independent Scotland would look like, and they're obviously perhaps different to the views of any party leadership at that moment in time. And it's a difficult thing to cede some of that ownership and some of that responsibility. We were willing to do it last time, and I'd be willing to do it again, because I think it is the right thing to do, in order to make sure that your movement's as broad as it possibly can be, but also as inclusive as it can be as well.
So obviously you've been in Parliament and have opposed many Conservative Prime Ministers, Conservative governments, and obviously now there's a Labour government in place. What would you say would be the main difference with working, say, Conservative government on, say, like Johnson, Truss and Sunak, and now working with the Labour government under Keir Starmer?
Not entirely sure, to be honest. I'm not being flippant. I think perhaps for me, I've got really high expectations of the Labour Party. I don't have high expectations of the Tories. I expect them to look after themselves and to look after their own. If the SNP did not exist in any way, my values would probably be not too dissimilar to traditional Labour values, and I'm sure that's probably why my granddad probably voted Labour. So I do have very high expectations for what I expect them to achieve, and I don't think they've met those expectations, if I'm honest. And I don't think that under Keir's leadership that they'll meet those expectations either, and that goes back to the values that my party has, being slightly different. There are some things that we'll obviously agree on, of course that's the case, and I think that's healthy and that's good in politics, and to be willing to say you agree is important, but I'm not sure that on many of the defining issues right now, I would find myself in a similar place to the Labour Party, whether that's in relation to our relationship with the European Union, whether that's in relation to the transformation which is probably required to certain aspects of the NHS, whether that's in relation to Labour's approach to those living on welfare, and certainly in relation to many aspects of their wider foreign policy. I'm not sure that their values are aligned to my parties in the way that I would hope for them to be. So my response to that would be as robust with them as it was with the Conservative Party.
I just want to talk about the devolution settlement and the powers which have been given to the Scottish Government are actually quite considerable compared to a lot of devolved administrations throughout the world. But yeah, there's kind of a problem with the Scottish Government that Scotland as a whole is performing behind the rest of the UK in some policies and some issues due like education and health. You know, we already talked about the high amount of drug death in Scotland. I think it's something like 5 times higher in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK. And in education, the exam results for Scotland are a considerable bit lower than the rest of the UK. The attainment gap is lower in Scotland, and there's also problems with the literacy rate and the numeracy rate, which is also lower in Scotland. So with the SNP having the power among those policies, if they're not to blame for those failures, then who are?
So I think there's a lot packed in there. If we go back to the drugs death side of things, I as much as we should absolutely treat it as a health issue, I think we should also, to a great extent, also focus on the wider poverty issue, which impacts upon many people as well, and the cycle which exists. You'll understand and agree, I'm sure, that 70% of welfare policies are reserved responsibility of Westminster, and what we currently have is a cycle which keeps going, and being able to break that is very difficult without the levers to do so. And there's a lot you can do around the economic growth, about job opportunities and so on and so forth, but breaking a cycle is very difficult if you don't have the powers to do so. And that's another aspect of that particular debate, which I think is important to focus upon. When we're talking about education, I'll refer back to my earlier statistic, which is the most important thing from my perspective, is outcomes for young people. 95% of Scotland's young people go on to those positive destinations. I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the economy. It should hopefully be a good thing for productivity, and I think it's a good thing for them as well. Is there a space to do things better and to do things well? Yeah, of course there is. That's always the case, and governments should challenge themselves on that basis. And there's certain aspects of the attainment gap where I'd probably disagree with you with regards to whether it's higher or lower, and there has been a closure with regards to certain aspects of that in a way which has perhaps not been as well documented as some of the more negative side effects. But on the counterbalance to that, the one thing that we offer, which students in a lot of places don't get, is that opportunity to go on and have higher education without having to pay for it. And that's transformational in a way which perhaps some people don't give us credit for. And of course, if we're to look at housing, if we're to look at the health service and so on and so forth, we can probably have a back and forth with regards to which statistics are better and which aren't. The key determinant and the key decision makers in all of this will be the Scottish people, and if they believe that we're acting in Scotland's interest and things are getting better, then I'm sure they'll vote for us just as they've done in the past.
One more, I think, go right back.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Stephen. So obviously Donald Trump has been re-elected
Who's that?
president. He does indeed have a presence just outside Aberdeen. Do you view his re-election as having any possible or significant impact on Scotland?
I don't know yet. I think if Mr. Trump's obviously got the golf course, which is just north of Aberdeen, which was pretty contentious at the time. I think it's safe to say. Look, I think the wider discussion and around that is probably framed on the potential for tariffs to be imposed on, for the potential impact upon global trade as a result of the decisions that he may or may not take. We're going to have to wait and see, and that's going to impact Scotland like anywhere else. I think that we all have our own views, some of them very strongly held with regards to Donald Trump, but ultimately he's going to become the President of the United States, and on that basis I would imagine that most folk will want to engage with him to try and get the best possible outcomes that they can. Whether that's doable or not remains to be seen, but I think that probably applies to maybe a lot of things that have been suggested.
Sorry, I'll go to Martin then for the last one.
Claire, that's very kind of you. As you know, I'm a trustee. I ask questions after all the students. Claire's done a great job about interrogating you. By the way, I commend you for answering them very honestly. Also, I think we all hugely commend you for showing such determination in your earlier life and now providing such good public service. One area that I just want to finish on, which is obviously of particular interest here, is given the fact that it's generally accepted that whiskey was discovered in Ireland, bagpipes were discovered in Ireland, and you stole them and monetised them. What would you like to steal off Northern Ireland next? Would you like to steal off the chance to trade with the EU and Britain when we can?
Well, I think you've asked and answered your own question there. That was instalment and maybe been reflecting upon that particular issue. You know, I don't think we've ever stolen anything. I think we've just been encouraged to make the best use of it. No, look, the point you've made was an important one. The situation which Northern Ireland finds itself in is very much the envy of Scotland right now, and the envy of lots of other places. And hopefully, and I say this in all sincerity, hopefully that's to the benefit of the people who live here, and that's the most important thing.
Thank you for another honest answer. I'll remember the word envy.
Okay, so.
You want to ask it?
Yeah. Oh, well, here, we can go for one last one. Yeah.
Is that alright?
Yeah.
I'm going to wish you Angela Martin now. Sorry, there's still all you want my answering anything about football. Thank you again, thank you for being so frank. As I mentioned to you earlier, we're one of the few university societies to hold what I consider a civilised and sensitive debate on the CAS review. I want to premise my question by saying I don't have any agenda other than a wish to kind of de-sensationalise this topic and have open and productive conversations about it. As I'm sure you know, several Scottish women have recently taken SNP ministers to court over the definition of a woman, and Kenny Lavenock, make of her whatever you will, launched an accusation only a month or so ago that the SNP has failed women. In light of that, I would like to ask what you think the way forward is for both the SNP and Westminster and politics in general, if we're navigating this highly contentious subject successfully, and would that include the implementation of the SLP?
So there's thank you for the question actually, because I don't think that politicians should be afraid of talking about this, because it's something that the public's talking about as well. And as we had a very brief chat about earlier, I'm one of the few who took I imagine one of the few who took an attempt to properly read the CAS report in as much detail as I possibly could. And you know, the thing for me which I've found to be the most challenging is the nature of the debate that exists. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that it's a very, very small number of people who are involved in this, and it can't be easy for them. It's not something that I'll ever have any personal experience of, unless, of course, my young children perhaps do. So in that context, it's important that we're civilised and respectful and understanding of the fact that there's a small minority of people to whom this reflects, in the same way that we have to recognise that there's women who have significant concerns, which is of course being played out in the courts in London, and we'll await the outcome of their determination. And I would simply say, and this is maybe probably the realest thing I've said tonight, but it's probably, in my view, one of the most important things, is that when it comes to an individual and their lives and their lifestyle choices, as long as they can be happy, as long as they can live in a circumstance which doesn't have a negative impact upon others, then I'm broadly supportive of that, which is why I've previously backed the Scottish Government in its efforts, and hopefully we can get to a position where we have certainty for everyone, for women and for trans men and women as well.
Thank you very much. I just want to say I really value that answer. I think one of the very few politicians who's kind of willing to venture into what's undoubtedly an incredibly toxic debate. It's just what I want as well. So, thank you. It's a fantastic answer.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm happy back on my two present.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you here. So we're all going to go to Lavery's after this, and you're very welcome to join us and see why Northern Irish whiskey is much better than Scotch. And I hope you'll pass on my best to Dundee United on the 26th of January when they take on Glasgow Rangers. So thank you very much. It's been excellent to have you here, especially coming all the way from Scotland. I mean, we struggle to get some Northern Irish Party leaders come from East Belfast, so having you come all that way it's been a great pleasure. So thank you very much. It's been a really insightful talk, and I think everyone here has probably enjoyed it. It's been really insightful, so thank you very much, and thank everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, folks.